Welcome to another one of my YouTube masterclasses. Now, in today's masterclass, I'm going to show you how to put sort of a semi-abstract landscapey background. I've used this behind animals that I've painted. You can use it in portraits. You can use it in parts of landscapes. I especially like it behind flowers and garden paintings where you just want the idea that there's sky behind and that there's some other greens and foliage in the distance, but you're not painting anything specific. You can see here I'm painting some hollyhocks. I have other videos on this channel about the hollyhocks. There will be a full tutorial coming up, a full paid tutorial, but there are also a couple of free videos. I'll link any videos where you've got other parts of this hollyhock painting, including the very popular one I did about the lines on the petals and another one that shows you how to get these nice curved stems. I'll link those in the description of this video. I've kind of divided this painting in half. So over here on the left, I'm actually going to have a wall and some bricks at the bottom, but all of this right-hand side is going to be sky coming down and fading into greens. And that's what we're doing today. So for the top part of my sky, you'll see we've got this area over here on the left that's kind of blocked off from the area on the right. So the trick is we want the sky to look like it just continues behind. Now, if this was an oil painting, we could just paint blue sky and then paint the stems on top. As it is, we have to paint these areas individually. Now, if you're worried about painting around something like this, we can use a smaller brush, changing to a larger brush as we come down. And if it seems to you easier to paint in small areas like this, you could, of course, adjust your composition so that there are more stems and divide the area into more of these sort of small islands of paper. I've done that in the past when I've been worried about getting a sky without any drying lines. I've got 2 water jars and I'm going to start by putting, I was going to say clean water, it doesn't look very clean, does it? I've obviously got something on my paintbrush there. You know what? You wash your brush and still there seems to be stuff on it. I'm picking up a little bit of this Daniel Smith Manganese Blue. It's a really fantastic colour for skies. It's kind of as if phthalo blue and cerulean had a baby, which I suspect you would find borne out if you had a look at the pigments on the tube. And I'm coming up here, but not going for flat blue colour, because we want the idea in this occasion that there's going to be a little bit of fluffy white cloud in our sky. And you see that I'm coming round quite methodically. As I come down, I'm going to add a little bit more clean water over this side just to get more of an idea of some cloud. And then we'll bring this paint down to meet that water area. Taking that clean water across to meet the edge of the stem. When you first apply the water, you never want to go right up to the edge of the area you're painting in because it's quite hard to see where you're painting. Being quite methodical here, I want to avoid leaving any puddles because those will cause me some back runs later on. And I also don't want to take this paintbrush back up to the top here where it's semi-dry because that's always a little bit disastrous. But remember, if you mess this up, you can always put another layer on top. It's best to let it dry completely before doing that. And I don't have to wait for this to dry before I move over here onto the right-hand side. So I've popped a little colour in these small areas here. I'm going to carry on now coming down. And if it seems daunting to paint all the way around this edge without stopping, we can use cloud to break these areas up, by which I mean I can put some clean water here, for example, and just work on the area above. Swapping to a larger brush now and remembering this idea of the sky being a little darker up high, fading a little as it comes towards our kind of imaginary horizon line. And I want to keep this area wet and moving, which is why it's important to use a larger brush. What you mustn't do is panic about tiny minor mistakes. People will rarely notice them, and your slowing down and your efforts at correction will likely cause more problems for you. Because we've got some cloud over on the left there, I'm going to add a little more clean water here. You see that I've got more than one brush. I've also got more than one water jar as I continue to bring the paint down. So let me give you a couple of tips for painting round things using this scrap where I was swatching different techniques. And what you want to do is make sure that you don't jab sort of towards things. Now, it can look a bit cack-handed when I'm working on YouTube because I can't always turn my board when I want to. I can't hold my hand in a position I would like to. It makes it quite hard to paint. Please strike up your tiny violins. The stress of my life as a watercolorist. Now, what you want to do instead is you want to come and do turn your paper because I assume you're not filming. What you want to do is you want to come along an edge. So here we see that we sweep along. Now you want to go right up to that edge. If you end up going over the edge, what you'll find is that everything ends up with this kind of outline. Now, of course, occasionally you're going to do that and it's fine. But if you do that everywhere, then things are going to start to look a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit awkward. So what you're aiming for is just to bring your brush along in this sweeping method. And this is going to be easier if you've got a large brush. The bigger the brush, the easier this is going to be. The more paint it holds, the more smoothly it will flow. That doesn't help you get into small areas, and that's why we have a second brush that we can pick up and just go in if we need to. I've also got a second water jar so I can add clean water when I want to. And what I'm not going to do when I see a tiny little mistake up here is go back up with extra paint or water because we're going to make drying lines up here. You'll see what happens when we take a wet brush back into a damp area. We'll start to get lots of little cauliflower bleeding lines forming. So you want to work methodically one side of your painting down to the other. If it dries too pale or anything else, what you can do is you can just go back on top with clean water without agitating too much, put a whole nother layer on. It'll smooth out your underneath layer at the same time. It's far better to do that than to obsess over every tiny little mark and drying line as you go along, slowing down your painting and causing all sorts of uncomfortable drying lines. Now I'm going to come down a little further and I'm going to put some more clean water in. But what I want to do this time is to adjust colour slightly. I'm also going to add a little more clean water up here. And I'm going to start introducing other colours now. So I'm going to go in with the blue as well. But I'm also going to use a little bit of, and I mean a little bit of permanent rose that I've used previously to just soften and warm up that colour a little. I can even, if I want to, add the tiniest touch of yellow just to bring in some greyish tones. We don't want it to go green quite yet until we get lower down the painting. So if that happens, you can just drop in a little pink to balance it out. I'm going to use similar colours over here in this gap. So we're going to start moving into the greens now, and we're going to start with the coolest colours. And pretty much going to paint this area down here without stopping. We will just add that last bit of water in there. So I'm going to start with the same colour I was using before. Also want to think about what we're going round. You know, you don't need it to be too pale here because these flowers won't show up at all. But we do also want to get the idea of a bit of distance here. So I'm going to start by going in with my nickel titanate because that's quite a dull colour, and I'm actually going to use a bit of cobalt blue, which I've already used in this painting, so we can take that in and start getting those softer greens which will naturally look like they're more in the distance. As I continue to work down and round, I can of course add, you know, if I want to get some little starbursts, I can add some wetter paint in. And unlike in the sky, it'll just look a little bit more like some kind of foliage. And as I paint this area here later, I'll need to remember which colours I used here so that we get this look of things just going across without breaking. Now you can see that what I've done here is I've gone in with brighter yellow. Now things that are warmer, brighter, more solid and with crisper edges will naturally look like they're further forwards, and I can use either of my blues. So I've got the manganese blue, which is going to give those beautiful brights. I've also got the cobalt, which is going to be a little darker. I have to be careful as I come down the bottom here that I don't make the green too similar to the green leaves that I'm painting around. So having gone in with those brighter greens, I'm now going to come down and start getting my colours a little bit darker. But I do have to watch that there's still a contrast down here with the greens I've already painted. Now, a contrast in tone is much more effective than a contrast in colour. You can put two different colours next to each other, but they're likely not to show up unless we have that contrast in tone. So where this leaf is light, I'll go in almost with neat blue paint, which will just mix to green as it hits the paper. And don't forget, again, you can get a bit of variation going on up here. And then as I come into this area here, I'm going to go more heavily into the yellow again and the lighter colours, which will allow this leaf that's already painted to show up. So I'm just painting in the gaps of the areas that I've missed so far. And I'm going to show you one more technique before we finish this video. But before that, could I ask, if you are not subscribed to the channel, I know it's boring and all of us YouTubers ask, but it makes such a difference to the algorithm and to our ability to continue making free content here on YouTube. So if you could subscribe, click the like button, leave me a comment, or better yet, share this video with a friend, I would really appreciate it. Next, we're going to go back up to the top of the painting. So I've painted this whole area, but I've got one more trick up my sleeve. I think this little cloud here is a little bit too white and I can't really see the edge of this flower very easily. I'm going to add a little bit of shadow. So what we're going to do here is go in with clean water. Now you do have to be careful doing this. Water alone can leave a drying line on top of paint. So I'm going to avoid those areas I went to before and almost dry the water out around the edges so it's not too wet. Just making a little shadow color in my palette. What I'm going to do is just drop a tiny bit of shadow into this cloud. Anywhere that you go off the edge of the water, you can sweep out with a damp brush. But again, be careful to avoid those areas you've already painted in, because too many plain white areas in your sky can just end up looking a little bit strange. Sometimes you need a little bit of cloud shadow to add more dimension.